Thanks so much for coming tonight. Welcome to the Center for Architecture for our big sold-out Climate Week program. I'm so excited you guys are all able to join. I am Bria Donahue. I'm the Director of Government Affairs here at the American Institute of Architects New York chapter. We're so excited we're able to partner with NRDC, the UN High-Level Climate Champions, and CLF this evening. So we have a super jam-packed agenda, so I'm going to keep it nice and brief. So here's a quick preview. What's in store for you? Quite the lineup we have. You're going to hear from two of our really preeminent legislative champions up in Albany, working hard, fighting for embodied carbon policy. Then you're going to hear a little bit about the New York context, what's already being implemented and taking place on the ground. Then you're going to hear from our amazing innovators in the concrete space, who's going to share details on their unique solution and really break down how this is not your grandparents' concrete we're dealing with. These are new stuff, okay? Then, I also wanted to share a brief overview of kind of what we're working on at the Center for Architecture and AA New York. So over the past year, the Committee on the Environment's Policy Subcommittee has been working super hard to develop a comprehensive strategy to reduce embodied carbon. This work led to 3 bills that are kind of detailed here, establishing a balance of carrots and sticks to incentivize the market to utilize more low-carbon construction materials and broader adoption of EPDs and whole building LCAs. So we got a financial tools bill, procurement requirements, building codes, lots to choose from, and I'm really glad we're able to have 3 of our sponsors tonight, Senator Kavanaugh, Assemblymember Tellez, and Assemblymember Carroll joining us. So with all of that, we need your help, we need your expertise to advocate for our legislation. So I strongly encourage you to join our working group. Everyone, get your phones out, scan the QR code, get signed up to get regular updates on our advocacy efforts, participate in meetings and outreach to legislators, join us for trips to Albany and more. And yeah, also, if you want to get more involved on some of the technical side of things with Carbon Leadership Forum, they have a number of regional hubs, which I strongly encourage you to join. And yeah, with that, Chris, I'll turn it over to you.
All right, thank you. All right. Keep it going for Bria. I want to thank AIA for putting on this event, but really Bria is absolute top-notch in terms of the energy and focus she's brought to bringing this event together, and she just does a lot of stuff. So give her a big pat on the back after the program. So my job is to be very, very brief here and give some opening remarks. I can't believe it's only Tuesday on Climate Week. Feels like it's next year. But I am a total nerd for this subject and didn't expect to ever be. I came from a solar background for 15 years. I've been working in carbon removal for the last 8 years or so. And I sort of accidentally fell into the low embodied carbon construction, particularly concrete, and was surprised to discover how fascinating of a subject it is. It's deceptively interesting in terms of how we transform these everyday materials into new things that are not only less damaging to the environment and to the climate, but beneficial to it. And 2 things I want to just say real quick is in the line of work that I do, which is mostly policy advocacy and business development in new and emerging climate tech sectors, I have always enjoyed and learned and benefited so much from my relationships with the architecture community. For me, it's this unique profession that has to build things that work and that are practical, but there's a vision that comes along with it, and that they're implementing new things in the real world that people experience. So hopefully you all did put on there, because architects make very good advocates as well, I've discovered. What we're going to do tonight is there's kind of the subject is obvious, but one of the things we really want to point to, right now I work a lot sort of more on the global scale around the COP conference and a lot of different hats, but in areas that we're talking about tonight about the decarbonization of the built environment, at this stage, places matter so much that we need to be able to point to places that are doing things both in the private sector side and the innovation side and the policy side that become these sort of bright lights that other places can really model after. And I think it's absolutely the case that New York City and New York State have emerged as such places in recent years. Some of my Bobby Carroll up here, we fought for probably the first bill of its kind on this subject many years ago. And so I think what's really, really exciting about this is we're going to talk about, obviously, a subject that has universal application and interest, but to really show you what New York's excellence is like in this subject area in terms of the kinds of policies that have been put in place, but also what's next. Hopefully some of this stuff up here. So you're gonna get a real look and hear about what we're doing here locally in New York. And then the last panel is quite different from that, but really so exciting. It's a panel of innovative companies that are all in concrete, that are really taking this essential material and making something very different, not just from a carbon reduction perspective, but also from a performance perspective, all of which either have a footprint here or projects here. And so you're just gonna hear from them about their companies and their technologies and the barriers they face and the opportunities. And hopefully you'll be able to, in your work, start to think about how can I use some of that stuff and be a customer. So I'm gonna get off right now and I'm gonna welcome up Mikhail, I think is coming. Hey Cindy, how you doing? And we'll go ahead and get right into it. We got everybody here? There we go, great. Thanks everybody.
Okay, great. How do we get the slides up? The clicker, great. Okay, amazing. Well, welcome everyone. It's such an honor to be here. Lauren and I are the leads for the New York State Embodied Carbon Working Group, which is a newly formed group, which we're super excited to debut here and also talk about the recommendations that are based on the hard work of many folks in this room. And in order to get started, I'm going to tell you a little bit about who we are and how all this came to be. So one of the things I think that has been most inspiring for me this summer is being able to work with colleagues who have been focused on embodied carbon in the New York space. So a little bit about me. I'm currently at the Natural Resources Defense Council, and before that, I was with NYSERDA here in New York State, where I co-authored both sets of New York State embodied carbon guidance, along with my colleague Marian Zhang, who's currently at OGS, and also worked on the embodied carbon recommendations in the New York Scoping Plan. And there was so much amazing momentum that I was involved with in New York State, and then transferring over to NRDC and kind of zooming out at the national level and being able to focus on multiple states. I've just been incredibly inspired by how much everyone is doing. And this spring, when we started seeing the cuts to the federal programs, I was texting with colleagues and folks that have been working on this for a while, and everyone was just like, what is happening? You know, will there be federal programs? What does this mean? Like what will go forward? What's possible? And Lauren and I had a text exchange, and we were like, we need to get people together in person, and we just need to connect and talk about it. We have a really great federal team at NRDC that had put together a really helpful tracker on all of the federal programmatic cuts that were coming through. And I was like, I can share that, and we can tell you kind of what we're hearing, and also talk about the really incredible progress that's happening at the state level, both within New York State and at other states. So we held a meeting this summer, and we thought it was just kind of going to be like a little bit of a conversation, and we would talk about the cuts and have a little bit of a breathe in, breathe out kind of moment. And what we stepped away with, it was 10 p.m. We did it after hours so our public sector colleagues could attend, was just really a desire to put our collective heads together and work on embodied carbon policy in New York State. And we were just like, man, all these public sector people, many from state agencies, local agencies, even some federal colleagues, were just so excited to be there. And we ended up having to kick people out, and we were like, we have to do another one of these. So we've had a couple this summer, and we ended up working on a draft action plan, which wasn't quite ready in time for Climate Week, but we really wanted to put something out in time, and so we were able to land a set of near-term policy action recommendations, which we'll be presenting to you today, and which went live today and is out to the press, so tell your friends. Yeah, very excited. And so I think I'm going to talk about the vision, and then I will turn it over to Lauren to get into some of the specifics. So this is kind of what we nailed down. So you can see we're envisioning a built environment that is deconstructed rather than demolished. a world in the next 10 years where all large building projects will take clear action to reduce embodied emissions. We are looking to establish a circular economy, a robust circular economy that uses recycled materials on projects, and really leaning on the importance of disclosure and meeting new design standards at the time of build. So that is what we envision in 10 years and what we're working towards. And I'll turn it over to Lauren to go into the specifics.
Mihal set the stage so well. There was something in how we were facilitating this too that was really important. And Mihal brought this, think big, think about the vision, think long term. What does it look like in 10 years, 20 years? And just to set the stage here today, we are in 2025. We have 2050 goals and various in between. How are we getting there? Are we making progress? What does that look like? So a lot of the time spent with these groups was thinking big and then thinking about the small steps to get us there. With New York State, there's a lot of nuances. You have the city, New York City, nothing like it. You have urban communities, you have rural communities. So there's a lot of considerations that go into this. When you're thinking about growth projections in different areas, you're thinking about waste streams, what can be repurposed, how things are processed, the infrastructure in those locations, and then also the conversation about affordable housing being a concern. And how can we think about adaptive reuse in this light? How can we think about what we already have and transforming it into something new and giving it new life and new communities? So that was a lot about how we were thinking about this overview. And so what you'll see here with the themes were 3 pillars. You have to incentivize and finance the market to mandate certain requirements. And you also need the infrastructure and the workforce and these community hubs. And so these are the 3 chapters is what we kept calling them. And there were 3 recommendations per chapter. So the first one was incentives and financial support. So this could be through the sales tax. How do we allow low carbon materials to have, we know there's sometimes a premium. You're trying to scale something, there will be that burden. How do we try to alleviate that? How can we think about a sales tax exemption? We're also thinking about, and I do want to set the stage, I think Chris mentioned, pointing to the successes. Many of these recommendations, before I get too far, are built on successes. And that was such a key component of us drafting these recommendations, is we want to show that this has been done. We want to show the examples. This is not always something novel. This is what has been happening and bringing it forward and accelerating progress in this way. So the demonstration of projects for best in class, we were reflecting on NYSERDA's work, really trying to point to projects and think about frameworks where these projects have been successful. And then the extended producer responsibility, simple example, if you have 2 materials and one of them is disclosing that it performs poorly, it's not durable, and at the end of its life, it can't really be repurposed or reused, but then you have a second material, and that one might disclose that it is durable and it can be repurposed or reused for another life. You might be able to make the choice in that moment about which product you choose, and that's what the intent of that producer responsibility would look like. We also think about codes and standards. We have targets, roadmaps, interim targets, having the expert advisory group. I'm just going to leave that as bullet points and point to a conversation I had yesterday. We often say perfect is the enemy of good in sustainability, and love JJ is in the room here, and the conversation was, where is the bar? How do we set the bar? The industry wants that. We need that. We need to know what the bar is, and we need a goal we can work towards, or else we're aimlessly in this analysis paralysis. Finally, the material reuse and circularity. So really leaning into thinking of old buildings as these valuable material banks, how we can reuse materials, how we can salvage them, and also considering the regional differences across New York State. So there's the idea of the deconstruction and reuse pilot programs, the material disclosures and reuse requirements, and then also the networks, right? Different networks for different areas of the state, and also thinking about the workforce. We want to be able to transition the workforce and build the skills to know how to disassemble. So I did want to pull in some information about ASCE so that We all know what is happening in the broader industry too. ASCE is the American Society of Civil Engineers. So there's two 2050 initiatives, one's for buildings and one's for infrastructure, and both of them are making monumental progress trying to inform structural and civil engineers on how to reduce embodied carbon. We are doing a ton of advocacy. We are on the global stage. We are pushing this message forward that engineers can design responsibly, and we can educate the next generation in terms of how to think about these strategies that can really consider the end of life. I will not take credit for this. This is SE 2050, an incredible data science team that has put together studies and analyses on the data that they have collected, and they are putting forward recommended limits for that building's structural system. This is monumental. So we are now aware of what that limit could look like when we're designing a structural system. And finally, there's more work to be done, but this year, SE 2050, I won't take credit for this either, but SE 2050's published their pre-standard, which is on the left, and then we're also actively working on the next versions of the low carbon concrete code and the ASCE 73 sustainable infrastructure standard. So much more to come, but lots of work in progress that we're really proud of.
Okay, we're going to turn it back over to Bria. We're told to keep it tight.
Okay, we're going to transition to, Assemblymember Carroll, if you want to give some remarks, and then Assemblymember Kellis, you can take it away. You can come up here. Perfect.
Good evening. I'm Assemblymember Robert Carroll, and I represent the 44th Assembly District in New York State. That is the neighborhoods of Prospect Heights and Park Slope and Windsor Terrace and Kensington and Ditmas Park, Brooklyn. And I'm in the 9th year in the legislature. I've been elected to 5 terms, and the reason I'm here tonight is because of Chris Neidl. Chris, where are you? You were speaking before. He has left, of course. But the reason I even know the term low-embodied carbon concrete is because of Chris. When I first got elected to the Assembly in 2016, I started working on some solar projects immediately because I felt that we had to do something with the environment. And I met some folks at Brooklyn Solar Works, an amazing company in Gowanus, Brooklyn, that puts home solar canopies on people's roofs. And that's where I met Chris. And we worked at first on some legislation around providing property tax abatements for people in New York City to install solar panels on their roofs, as well as energy storage systems, batteries, which unfortunately, as many of you probably know, it is still impossibly hard to actually get a battery installed in your basement or backyard in New York City. I think only a handful have used that tax credit that we were able to pass so many years ago, and that is very frustrating. But because of that work in 2019, Chris had brought to me a new idea. And I think sometimes the best legislators are real jacks of all trade, right? They are not masters of a specific discipline, but if they have a great community around them, they can gain an expertise, and of course they can introduce legislation. And so I'm not an engineer or architect by training, I'm a lawyer. But Chris had come to my office to tell me about this idea of low-embodied concrete and how we could really make gains in the environment and making sure that we lessen our carbon emission if we look to our built environment. At the time, I did not know that concrete was the second most used substance in the world. That I believe to this day, the production of concrete worldwide is twice as much. The emissions is twice as much as all the vehicles in North America combined by 2. So this is clearly a huge problem. And so we got to work on the first version of the Low-Embodied Carbon Concrete Leadership Act, LECLA, very, very catchy. And what that bill did was it was going to be very prescriptive. It was going to tell both the public sector and the private sector that you would get certain incentives if the concrete you used met certain guideposts that we believed would mean that it was low-embodied carbon, that it really was a better, more environmentally conscious concrete. Through the magic of Albany, that did not happen. the bill changed. And over 2 years, it morphed into a bill that directed OGS, the Office of Government Services, to come up with a standard for public procurement of low-embodied concrete. That bill that is law today still set a great standard. Some of that, the reason that working group exists is because of that bill. The reason the Inflation Reduction Act during the Biden administration had implementation around low-embodied concrete was because they saw states like New York and I believe Colorado right after implement these kinds of policies. And so I think it is so important that New York and other states that want to lead the way in making sure that innovators, engineers, architects are using the best science and being incentivized by state and local governments as well as the private sector to find the least carbon intensive building tools. This is what we need to do. And we got a lot of pushback, and especially when you're in Albany and you're dealing with mostly people who are not engineers, talking about very complex ideas and trying to convince one another what the difference between concrete and cement are, which I think I still kind of know. It can be difficult. And we, of course, faced some serious headwinds from certain environmental advocates who I think were well-intentioned, but misguided. So one person, and I'll name her, not to vilify her, but Judith Inc., who comes to Albany regularly, who's a thoughtful person in the plastics movement, was in the Obama administration as a Northeast Regional Director for the EPA, was dead set against this bill. And the bill almost didn't happen, and we wouldn't be talking about it today, and we wouldn't be talking about New York leading the way in low-embodied carbon concrete if she got what she had intended, which was she thought we were useful idiots for large multinational corporations that wanted to burn fly ash and tires so that they could corner the cement clinker industry and thus the concrete industry. She was talking about Lafarge Holcomb and some other big industries. And I understood her cynicism, right? I get it. I think too often in government, well-intentioned but non-expert legislators often draft legislation thinking that they're moving the ball forward, when very sophisticated, sometimes business actors, have really already jumped 5, 6 steps ahead of them and have really crafted a piece of legislation that is to their favor and not to what we were trying to do, which of course is to bring environmentally conscious building materials to New York. The reason this didn't happen, and the reason I was unafraid that this wasn't going to happen, even though Judith was convinced I was an idiot, wasn't because I magically understood how concrete was produced. It wasn't because I magically understood the engineering of it, but because the advocates who came and helped draft the bill. I wasn't approached by the CEO of Lafarge Holcomb to draft this bill. I wasn't approached by large industry trying to corner a market in New York State. I was approached by environmental advocates. I was approached by engineers. I was approached by academics at Columbia University. And I think that's so powerful, and I think it's so powerful in this moment. I think there are lots of people who are looking at our country today and are very worried about where we're going, especially federally. And the thing that I find most heartening is that well-informed, well-intentioned individuals who band together are exceptionally strong. And I think they're strong in this space. I think they will be strong in other spaces. And I look forward to working with all of you in the future to try to figure out ways that we can make New York not just a leader in environmental sustainability and low-embodied carbon concrete, but in so many other ways to make our nation a better and a stronger place and to lead the world into a healthier, more environmentally conscious place. So thank you so much for this opportunity to speak to all of you tonight.
Okay, so excited to be here. Happy to nerd out with you all. I'm going to try and, I'm a professor, so we are not short-winded or succinct necessarily because we love to nerd out, but I'm going to try. And I even gave myself notes to keep myself on track, which I was very proud of myself. So here's some foundationally that things that we do know. In New York State, buildings are the #1 emitter of greenhouse gas emissions. The #4 emitter of greenhouse gas emissions is waste. So keep those two in mind. Obviously, we have to address both of those issues, reduce the greenhouse gas emissions in both of those if we are going to remotely meet our greenhouse or our CLCPA goals. Solutions that we all know about, this is nothing new to you all, but this is something that I talk to my colleagues about, that I try and teach. Deconstruction versus demolition that was already talked about, decarbonization of buildings, building the circular economy, all of these things have to happen simultaneously. So I have been working on legislation that would both create a stick and a carrot. You have to have both at the same time. So the stick, when I talk about a stick, is that you have X date to reach Y outcome. And that is a very important bill that we have, a decarbonization bill, that is Bill 8456. And I bring this up because I'm going to talk about policy first. I'm going to be a policy wonk, and then I'm going to switch hats, and I'm going to talk politics. And hopefully we will all walk away super motivated and know exactly what we need to do next from this, 8 to 10 minutes. So the decarbonization bill sets requirements. By 2026, buildings, so construction, additions, and major renovations will have to meet a requirement of 15% reduction in embedded carbon. And by 2033, 30%. So this sets those requirements in law, just like the CLCPA says, we will meet X requirement by X date. Setting that framework. In this bill, it outlines 3 pathways to reach that goal. One of them says that if you retain 45% of the existing structure and up to 50% or more of the new infrastructure, using several clear pathways that's outlined by the bill, show or prove that that new infrastructure is going to have a 15% reduction or 30%, depending on the year. There are 2 other pathways. One is outlining, and of course, all of the details say that it has to be third-party verified. It uses international standards that you would all understand. But the second pathway says that the products that you're using, doing a life cycle analysis of those products that you achieve using estimates and independent verification, that you achieve the total reduction embedded carbon of 15 or 30%. And the third pathway is a life cycle analysis. Again, all of these you know exactly what I'm referring to. And that third, of course, is for the entire project, the entire building. That sets the framework. You can't put a bill like that out and pass it and not support it and give context that would enable developers to actually reach those goals. So there are other bills that I carry that would help. For example, Bill A3029 is, and this is just a small bill, this is just an example of one piece that you put in place to help developers reach these outcomes. And it is, right now we know, and this was a bill that passed in the state of Washington, when buildings are deconstructed, there is load-bearing wood, like 2x4s, 2x6s, 4x4s, right now we don't really have a mechanism to reuse them. Unless they go through an entire process of being reevaluated, graded, certified, but they have just been standing in a building, load-bearing, for the last 100 years. So should that not be some evidence enough that this is, wood that's capable of being reused? And recognizing that in and of itself is, in a way, a form of certification. So this bill would allow for wood that is, as I said, 2x4s, 2x6s, 4x4s, those structural wood, as long as it is not decayed or as long as there is no structural damage, that you would allow it to be used in, let's say, if it's 2x4s or 2x6s, you would assume that it is grade 2 and it is SPF grade, so the lowest quality, which means that you would either, at a minimum, meet existing code, or you would be overbuilding, but not underbuilding. So you assume that it is the weakest version of qualifying wood to be vertical studs, for example, in that building. But it would allow for reclaimed wood to be used in construction. It's a very simple, straightforward bill. As I said, it's already passed in Washington State. It's been introduced in many different states. Right now, I just want to step back for a second and point out some other statistics that I think are really important. We have 15, at the outmost 25 years left of all the landfills in New York State. Once that window passes, we are going to have to outsource and ship out of state every single piece of waste that we produce. 18.8 million tons of that is C&D waste, which is about 43% of all waste that's produced. About 7.7%, so about another, actually, I'm sorry, that's 60% of all waste is C&D. About 43% of that is from buildings. So we have a lot of potential here of material that is being thrown away. Right now, the estimates, Cornell did an evaluation, about 60% of that off the bat could be reused. But we're using a wrecking ball, we're breaking it. The minute you do that, of course, then it's waste. So that is the first bill. The second bill that I think is really important on the incentive side, and this supports helping reach the goals of that first bill, is a deconstruction versus demolition bill. And I can't remember the number off the top of my head. I'm usually nerdy enough that I would have all of them. How many people here are familiar with that bill? 3. Okay. So in New York State, every state is different, but it is very, very difficult in New York State, because we are a home rule state, to have the state dictate to local municipalities what they do with their zoning or with their ordinances. That is considered the purview of local governments. So a lot of times when we are trying to get changes to happen at the municipal level, like zoning or building codes, we create incentives. So what this bill does is it creates a model ordinance, because what we don't want is for every single municipality to create a deconstruction ordinance requiring a certain amount of deconstruction, but every single one of them is completely different with no structure, no guidance, and every developer that comes in has to, relearn with every municipality. That would be hell for anyone. We want to prevent that. So we've created a model ordinance, and there's another reason why we do this, is because there are certain things that need to be in place in order for a circular economy to exist around buildings. You don't just deconstruct buildings and expect that you will have a successful market. You have to have a warehouse infrastructure in order to house that material so that it is not sitting out and being destroyed. So you need to build that warehouse infrastructure. You need to build a trained workforce, and you need to build a marketplace. And you obviously need policy in order to initiate those. So this bill is designed to do all 4 of those things. With the model ordinance, the state, if the municipality is willing to adopt the model ordinance, the state would give incentives to those municipalities, and those incentive dollars could be used to build warehouse infrastructure, to contract for that infrastructure, to do direct grants to contractors for the differential in cost to deconstruct versus demolish. Also technical support for the municipalities. It could also be used to compensate, because you would want to allow for the contractors to have a reduced cost for their landfill fees. So if they're willing to deconstruct a certain percentage of their building for the material that's remaining, they would be incentivized by having a reduced cost for the remaining material that they would have to send to a landfill. These are types of ideas that are part of the model ordinance. You put these things in place, requiring a base percentage of deconstruction versus demolition, you can then be eligible for the state funding to help you do that work. So it is, again, as I said, more of that creating the structure and creating the incentive system. And what we have found, there was an amazing white paper that came out from Cornell University outlining all of the existing legislation that has been put in place in cities and states and at the national level throughout New York State. There's like 15 pages of it that have been very, very successful. And this model ordinance was created from a bunch of those very successful initiatives and interventions that have been done. So I highly recommend reading that white paper that was released last year. But the industry, it has been shown in New York State, if we create this circular economy using structures like what would be established with this deconstruction legislation, it is about a $3.3 billion industry that we're leaving on the table. So it would significantly reduce, obviously, the waste that's going into landfills. It would build a huge economy. And the last piece of it is that it creates a state certification program for contractors. So it would also train the workforce. If you put all of these pieces together, we are more likely to then reach the requirements that are established in the decarbonization legislation that I mentioned at first. So it's, no one bill is the magic bullet. Building a suite, which is why it's so important to have organizations like AIA, because they put together the package of bills, bring all of them to you and say, we need to pass this suite of legislation in order to really create the shift in our economy, to support these budding businesses that have the materials, that have the technology, that would actually reach these goals of 15% by 2026 and 30% by 2033. So that's the policy piece. Really quickly, I want to talk about the politics. Every state is completely different in how bills move through the legislature. We have 2-year cycles. Bills are introduced in the Senate. They are introduced in the Assembly. We have companion bills in both. Independently, they have to pass. A bill would need to go through both houses. If a bill goes all the way through one house, but it doesn't go through the other, the bill is dead. There are some states where it will go through one house, it'll pass that house, and then be sent to the other house and pass that house. That is not how it works in New York State. We have a 2-year term, and there are about 10,000 to 12,000 bills that are introduced per term. We pass somewhere between 800 to 1,200 bills per session, which means that every bill is fighting an uphill battle against every other bill. We have 5 months of session per year. And the first 3 months is the budget. So we have somewhere between 15 and 25 days left to pass the other 10,000 bills every single year. Just to give you a sense, so bills don't die by getting voted down in a committee or on the floor. A bill dies because it doesn't make it onto an agenda. So the first big hurdle is convincing central staff, leadership, and the chair of whatever committee it's been assigned to put it on an agenda. They're depending on the content of the bill. So for example, the deconstruction versus demolition bill, that has a grant program, which means that it has a fiscal to it, which means that it would not only need to go through government operations where it's been assigned, but it would at least also need to go through Ways and Means, which is finance, and then potentially rules, and then potentially the floor. Every single time it's been assigned to a new committee before going to the floor, it needs to be put on that agenda, and you kind of have to start the process all over. So what are the ways in which someone would get a bill through? Building a huge outside coalition where you have a lot of people who are writing into their legislators and say, please sign on to this bill. I cannot emphasize enough how much your voice matters as experts. If you reach out to your legislator and you say, this is the bill that will get done what I need you to support this. Having your association write a formal letter of support, that is an endorsement of the bill. That is a second thing that can be done. A third, of course, having a lobbying entity that goes to Albany, meeting with leadership and meeting with central staff. It is an unfortunate reality that that central staff has a tremendous amount of power to determine what does or doesn't move forward. So having a bunch of legislators who are co-sponsors and having the chair in support of it is not necessarily a guarantee that the bill is going to be moved forward. So having lobbyists who come and speak to central staff is another piece. While you're simultaneously getting to the governor and saying, hey, if you put out the word saying you support this, the legislature might not resist moving this because they know once they move it, you will sign it. So, it's hitting all of these at the same time. My colleague, Bobby Carroll, and I think are two particularly stubborn legislators that fight very hard to get bills through. I think my middle name, I've been told, is Relentless Killis. Part of that is understanding the strategy and making sure you have an inside-outside game. I cannot emphasize enough. I'm doing that inside work. I'm making sure that the bill is technically accurate. I'm making sure that I coordinate with all of the experts so that the language, there aren't any fatal flaws. I'm meeting with the departments on the executive side to make sure that I get their feedback and input to decrease the likelihood that the governor would go against the bill, or that she would veto it or want a huge chapter amendment if we get it over to her. I'm doing all those things inside. It's the outside game that I always need if it is a substantial bill, and I'm not very good at carrying non-substantial bills. So assume they all are, because this industry needs to happen. And what by industry, I mean building the circular economy. There's so much potential. And one last thing that I'll leave you with, and an argument that I think is really valuable right now, tariffs are making costs go through the roof. They're making the lead times for materials through the roof. Building a circular economy right now would not only ensure an increased affordability of these products, but they would be available instantaneously, and they would be available down the street instead of coming from, across the world. So there now is a very good time to make these arguments. Technology is, you will hear all night long, is blossoming. And if New York State doesn't lean in, then other states and other countries will pick up the ball, and we will not be the capital of those markets. And those are the last arguments that I would say will work, because economics is really king when you're talking about policy moving forward. So I have multiple events that I'm going to, but please reach out to my office if you want to follow through. AIA has been a huge supporter, and also wealth of expertise on the language of all three pieces of legislation. So thank you to all of you, and I know you have great speakers coming up, so I will step aside.
Amazing. Thank you both, Assemblymember Carroll and Assemblymember Kellis, for those amazing remarks. We'll now move on to our discussion on the New York context.
Okay, well, thank you. It's on, okay. Thank you, Assemblymember Kellis, for those really inspiring remarks. I'll just say, I'll introduce myself again briefly. I'm Michal Haramati, and I lead the Industrial Decarbonization State Policy at the Natural Resources Defense Council. For those who don't know us, we're one of the largest environmental NGOs in the US. We're largely responsible for the creation of the Clean Air and Clean Drinking Water Acts, and also very involved at the federal level in the creation of the IDP programs at the Department of Energy and a number of other initiatives, really making funding available for emerging technologies and the next round of solutions that will get us to our climate goals. And I just kind of want to start briefly and just say how I got into this, which is that I'm from the building decarbonization space. So I worked on energy efficiency, building decarbonization, electrification for many years. I came from California, where I worked at the California Public Utilities Commission and also the California Energy Commission on building decarb, and then came to New York as a building decarb expert to help on the Carbon Neutral Buildings Roadmap and the Climate Act. And while I was doing that, I learned about just the huge chunk of emissions that are coming from building materials. And most importantly, over the next 30 years, about half of the emissions from the building sector are actually going to come from the materials rather than the operations of the building. And when I heard that, as someone who cares deeply about the climate and really is kind of striving at what I can do to be most impactful, I was like, it is hard for me in good conscience to work on anything else knowing what I do and knowing how little is being done. And that was about 5 years ago. And I'm really excited to say how much has been accomplished since in New York State, and really just how much is going on in this space. I'll just wrap up from Assemblymember Kellis's remarks and in that call to action, which is that about May or June is when these bills are heard in committee. So this is next year. If you are able to write those letters to be available to go to Albany, to be able to make calls, if you can get on that action list that Bria showed earlier, and hopefully she'll show at the end, that is really how you can make policy on this stuff in terms of affecting change. So please, if you get a call from myself or from Bria or others who are working in this and say, we need calls, we need letters, please respond and know that that's about when we'll be asking. So with that, I'd like to kind of turn to this panel, and we have three very accomplished panelists. We'll go through kind of independently, and I'll ask each of them to introduce themselves. And maybe we can start with the first slide. I'm going to give a little bit of context. Do I have the ability to do that? Let's see. Aha. Tricky. Okay, so, nope. Maybe I'll just speak to the context. Okay, I had a nice slide that kind of outlined all that we've done in the last 5 years. Bria's coming up to do it. And Assemblymember Carroll talked about the LECLA bill in 2021, that really, the Low Carbon Concrete Leadership Act, that really kicked all of this off, and was the first of its kind among low carbon concrete bills in the US, really, and was the model for all others, which is, I think, a huge accomplishment. And he was correct in identifying that that was used also as the model at the federal level. Soon after that came executive orders at both the New York State and New York City level for reductions and kind of specifics around how that could happen. The Climate Action Council, the CLCPA scoping plan, came out in 2022, and myself and a colleague worked on recommendations for embodied carbon that are both in the buildings chapter, the waste chapter, and the industrial chapter. So a very strong policy precedent that is setting up a lot of this work. OGS and my former employer, NYCERDA, where Z comes from and is currently, published 2 sets of guidance identifying the materials for reporting in New York State, and limits and EPD requirements and contract language for reduction in emissions on state projects. This is big stuff, right? This is like for the entire state of New York, for all of the public sector projects. And then in 2024, EDC published its circularity guidelines, which Gazem is going to be talking about, which I think really set the stage and the precedent for what is possible in terms of the specifics of, from start to finish, what should be done on a building project. And then we have a commitment from New York State made last year also to reduce emissions by 30% by 2028 on public projects. A deconstruction ordinance from Auburn passed last year, and then the very helpful HCR Homes and Community Renewal Guidelines that Arab helped to develop and that Joe worked on. So there is a ton happening in this state. And New York is just like leading the pack on this and has so much to be proud of. And I say this as somebody who's been working on buildings for a long time. This is the most exciting thing that I've worked on in my career. And the reason why is because there's so much potential here. There's so much low-hanging fruit. And there's so much that can be done with existing resources at zero or little cost. So with that, I want to go back to our panel bio slide. And I'm going to ask Gizem actually to start us off. So Gizem, can you introduce yourself and talk a little bit about the work of the New York City Economic Development Council and how that relates to embodied carbon?
Sure. Hi, everyone. Good evening. Really nice to be with you all here today. My name is Gizem Karagaz. I sit on the Green Economy team at the New York City Economic Development Corporation. We're a quasi-governmental agency tasked with enabling the equitable and sustainable transition and development of New York City's economy. We do that through a few key tools in our policy toolkit. So we manage real estate, which is 64 million square feet of industrial assets, waterfront infrastructure. Alongside that, there's a $9 billion capital construction portfolio, and we enable the development of key innovation industries, specifically those in the green economy, life sciences, and tech. So specific to the green economy, we released our vision in 2024 with the Green Economy Action Plan, which is the first of its kind sizing and forecasting of key sectors in the green economy as it exists in New York City today and what it will look like in 2040. What we're seeing is that there are key climate innovations that will be really necessary to growing sectors like renewable energy, building decarb, e-mobility, amongst many others. And a lot of those innovations need supportive innovation infrastructure or systems in order to ensure that they come online at the scale and timeline by which we need to achieve some of our climate goals. When it comes to building decarbonization in particular, we think of two strategies. So we're looking at how do we maximize our existing building stock, the over 1 million buildings in New York City today, through retrofits, electrification, but also enabling materials reuse. And also, how do we allow new alternative low carbon materials to come online? So this can either be through materials that are deconstructed and fed into a new product, or it can be new bio-based innovations that a lot of entrepreneurs are working on. And what we're finding is that over half of the green economy jobs in New York City today are in building decarb. So this comes from both the opportunity, so the 40% of global greenhouse gas emissions that come from the building sector, of which 13% are material specific, and also from the leadership of New York City, which in 2024 also published the first of its kind 50% reduction of embodied carbon on city capital projects. So really there's this balance of meeting opportunity and demand. What we're thinking about at EDC a little bit more holistically is how do we ensure that the materials, systems, and processes by which to enable reuse actually get implemented. And there are a couple key strategies that I'll just give a brief framework for, and then we'll dive a little bit deeper. So when it comes to testing of the new materials, we're really focused on allowing access to physical infrastructure where these prototypes can collect feedback from a live urban environment, such as at the Brooklyn Army Terminal, which is a key EDC asset, in order to ensure that that prototype then gets developed. And also, a lot of that data that comes from a real-world condition can be used to unlock state incentives, or it can be used to make a pitch to your next customer and say, this is what our product performs as, come on board, be a commercial buyer. Once we have a product that more or less has been validated, we're seeing a need to really navigate regulatory wayfinding to deploy it at scale. And there's a lot of key partnerships and collaboration that's necessary, and that has to happen across sister city agencies. So EDC works very closely with the building department and the fire department to ensure that there are regulatory pathways forward for technologies that are coming online when it comes to battery storage, sustainable construction materials like mass timber, and the key infrastructure there is enabling communication and early on in a project. So essentially the feedback loop allows for a project to move forward on time and on budget in order to not get stuck on a permitting timeline. And then last but not least, we're thinking about how do we leverage government procurement power in order to facilitate demand for materials, specifically reused materials. And there, our circular construction guidelines have been really key because they are a signal to all of the consultants and contractors that we work with through our capital projects on the types of skills and also the values and expertise that we look for in partnership when it comes to working on these large-scale capital projects.
Super helpful. Just very quickly, if you could just list a couple of the projects that EDC is working on in the space, just so that folks know what to keep an eye out for, or ear out for.
Sure. So one of the key pilot projects that we are implementing the guidelines on is the Spark Kips Bay project in East Midtown. It is the redevelopment of key life sciences and educational facilities. And we're using that as an opportunity to understand what are the key learning the key decision points that have to be made across a project's life cycle, starting from schematic design all the way to construction, in order to ensure that circularity makes its way through.
Thank you. Very exciting projects, and I will be eagerly awaiting the results. Ziggy, could you go next and just introduce yourself and maybe say what some of the projects are that you've been working on at NYCERDA and kind of how NYCERDA has been engaging in this space?
Yeah, hi, Ziggy Majumdar. Good evening, everyone. Senior Advisor in NYCERDA Innovation. First, I have to say, if everyone to give a quick round of applause, NYCERDA's 50th anniversary is this year. So 1975 to 2025. So I'm excited to be part of the organization. There's a lot of energy there. It's working in energy. NYCERDA has a variety of different programs, as many of you are aware. Really focused on promoting enough energy, affordability, reliability, and part of that is the need to retrofit buildings and also provide materials for construction, everything that's needed, that involves energy. And we've recognized, and actually related to Gizem, a great partner where a lot of the discussion about policy, opportunities for first-of-a-kind pilots, what we're doing is supporting in the embodied carbon space, besides the roadmaps, the policy advice, when Michal was at NYCERDA, examples like that, but putting out funding opportunities that try to really say, okay, here's where you're going with policy, here's where the economy could go, but we need solutions. We need real tangible solutions that are affordable, work as they should perform, right, the codes and standards. And so we have the Building of Excellence program, right, which is an example. A great program, put out over $80 million of funding, which are, LEED, WELL, all kinds of certifications, right, which are the current state of practice, right? What's the best you can do now? How much does it cost? How well does it work? And use those case studies to keep learning. In the NYCERDA Innovation and Research, we do emphasize also first-of-a-kind demonstrations, but also product development that could grow the ecosystem locally, right? Grow the needed supply chains, right? So if you're close, you got lower embodied carbon. First of all, we got a lot of waste material. We got agriculture, forestry, landfills, wastewater facilities, all of which could go into valuable products. So we try to attract the best and brightest. Many are here plugging for the next panel. Garrett, Grishma, Meta also. We're proud to be supporting great teams like that are really pioneering solutions at the cutting edge of what's possible, that could offer climate solutions, right? Carbon storage in buildings, but also are consistent with growing local supply chains and local supply. So in the next 5 years or so, 5-10 years, if we're significantly able to scale up a supply of sustainable, low-carbon products, right? So the foresters that were selling materials to Fort Drum power plant don't have anywhere to sell. You could maybe turn it into a building material, right? And so we have, things that are with windows, building envelope, building insulation, structural materials, concrete, everything you can think of, because ultimately, if the buildings are better, healthier, more energy efficient, that's great. We need that from the energy side. we don't want the embodied carbon impact to be terrible, and we don't want to rely on uncertain supply chains as well, right? As we've learned, things change in the world. And so as everyone spoke, there's a lot of potential. So we're focusing, we have the Buildings of Excellence and Innovation Department currently. We have the Natural Carbon Solutions Innovation Challenge portfolio. We've put out 2 rounds of funding there. We have the Carbon Tech Development Initiative that's administered by Columbia University, Columbia Technology Ventures. There's actually a summit on that tomorrow. That's also supporting teams that are pushing the cutting edge in new materials that could potentially be carbon negative. I see Marina here, also inspired by some work by the Department of Energy, so using buildings as carbon storage. We try to leverage a lot of that work, right? And we're also trying to be an engine of economic growth that, statistically, what people have looked at, for every dollar we put in, there's been $10 multiplied on top of it coming into New York State, whether from federal or private investment. So we try to de-risk. We try to get it past like that initial valley of death and hope others will kick in so that the policy, is moving, but then we could have products that could meet those policy constraints, right? That here are solutions, and 2035, hopefully we have plenty of them. So anyway, that's the way we're looking at it from that perspective. I'll stop there, maybe.
No, that was a great overview. And I think what's so interesting about NYSERDA is it's not just focused on kind of like the stuff that needs to happen now, but it's also focusing on developing the next set of solutions, right? And so for New York State, our Climate Act has a requirement for an 85% reduction by 2050 across the board. And for like cement and concrete, for instance, we think we can get maybe a 50% reduction with existing technology. And then, how are we going to get that remaining 50%? And so I think that's one of the things that's so exciting about the innovation program at NYSERDA. And I'm wondering, can you, if you don't mind, just saying a few of the awardees for the Natural Carbon Solutions grant?
Yeah, across that, like we've had Garrett, our Bioforce Tech, our Carbon, Meta, Pratt Institute, others that are in there. Grishma was through the Carbon Tech Development Initiative, but we have Syracuse University, SUNY ESF, Assembly OSM. We have, now I'm going to get in trouble because I'm leaving people out. There was we had 20 teams. We had ARUP as well, right, which was actually in a different type of challenge, which was actually green infrastructure. But it's related. It's embodied carbon storage, mitigate the heat island effect, urban heat island effect, so it's easier on the electric grid. And so we had also Thornton Tomasetti. We have Sunthrough also trying to make there's some carbon that goes into there, trying to make an aerogel material that makes double pane glass the equivalent of triple pane. So reduces the embodied carbon of the window insert, actually there's ideas about using carbon negative methanol and things like that as the feedstock for it. So carbon utilization. Hempitecture as well is another one, which they were also connecting the ecosystem there. They were also a winner of the Grow New York competition because there was a lot of excitement from the farmers of buying a supply of hemp. The case study we looked at was when they opened up their manufacturing facility in Idaho for hemp insulation. They started to be the biggest state in terms of hemp production, right? Farmers saw, okay, we could have a couple different product lines from hemp, but we've got a guaranteed buyer for large volumes. So that helps drive the whole ecosystem. So we're in discussions with Cornell, Larry Smart, other experts, economic development, how we can look at all the parts of the supply chain, right, beyond our funding, and how they can come together, right? So anyway, sorry if I didn't mention people's names, but I'm kind of blanking now, but that hopefully gives you a few. Yeah.
I think it's exciting because there's so much. And just if those who are award winners could raise their hand, I feel like, or have like a new product just so that people can see. I know you guys received a grant. I think there's a few more maybe? All right. Anyway, lots going on. Look at the people who have the little dots on there, the red dots on their name tags. Okay, I want to make sure that we get a chance to talk to Joe from ARUP as well. And so Joe, if you don't mind introducing yourself also and talking about really the sizable amount of expertise that ARUP has developed on this topic and specifically your work in New York.
Yeah, sure. Good evening, everyone. I'm Joe McGranahan, and I'm an embodied carbon consultant with Arup here in New York. And most recently, we had the pleasure of working with New York State's OGS department to helping develop their second half of their guidance for Executive Order 22. So the first half of Executive Order 22 had to do with reporting for concrete materials and other sort of materials that are regularly used in construction. So New York State agencies have to collect EPDs for those materials. And the second half of Executive Order 22 is starting to look at how to, assess the impact of buildings. So looking at life cycle assessment. What OGS wanted to do, and CLF was an advisor on this project with us as well, was to sort of start to take a look at other guidance that was happening in other cities, municipalities, private standards, and kind of just general industry knowledge around how to perform an LCA and determine what was best for New York State. And so what we were able to do is we were able to look across kind of the spectrum of different LCA guidance that's in currently out there right now. There's some very kind of open guidance, such as Cambridge, Massachusetts, who kind of has their guidance and just says, okay, here are a couple of standards like LEED and Envision you can follow to create an LCA for your project, but don't get too much into the specifics. And then there are really, really kind of detailed structural engineering oriented guidance like SEI 2050's, their pre-standard that they just released on life cycle assessment, which go really, really deep into what connections to include in an assessment, the exact not carbon factors, but the exact scope of the assessment down to the nitty-gritty. And so we looked at those two approaches and kind of everything in between, and we thought that the first half of the guidance, sort of the Cambridge Mass approach, while it would be easy to adopt, it doesn't quite get to the level of specificity that we'd want when we're starting to talk about reducing carbon over time in New York State at 15% or 30% with the coming bills and legislation. And so what we wanted was a more scientific approach, but something that's more sort of adoptable than SEI, who might, to people who might have that really specific structural engineering experience and background, and we didn't want to intimidate project teams with sort of burdensome requirements on projects. And where we landed on that was somewhere in the middle. The guidance is still kind of in the process of review right now with OGS, but we're really, really excited about it, and we think it's going to be great for the state.
Really appreciate that work, and also your work on the housing and community renewal guidance, which is the first one really to establish an LCA requirement at the statewide level, so that was very exciting. I know that in the process of developing the Executive Order 22 guidance, you reviewed a lot of projects and a lot of methodologies out there. Can you speak to some of the more successful projects that you looked at?
Yeah, absolutely. So at Arup, we also have in the past, done kind of portfolio decarbonization work for embodied carbon. We're currently supporting SFO as they decarbonize cement that they're purchasing for their construction projects, in addition to that, sort of a larger technology client. And I think the biggest takeaway that we had from those projects was that we need to know what sort of products are out there. So for those projects, we looked at, locally available concrete mixes, what sort of performance requirements they met, and what kind of carbon impact they had. Did some data analysis and said, okay, this is what's feasible for sort of a standard or a target for something like a Buy Clean initiative. And the other day, I looked at New York State on EC3, just kind of filtered the list of available concrete mixes, and there's 3,000 available mixes just ready to kind of tap into here. So I think the data and the supply of materials is here, and we just need to kind of get into it. So
that's very helpful, and I'll just note that compared to England, where Arup is based, we're about 10 years behind in the US, and so we still need to collect a lot of information on our supply chains, and really a lot of these are local materials, and the embedded emissions very much have to do with transportation, installation, fabrication. Those are things that are done here or close by a job site, and so we have to develop local values for them. New York specific or North American specific values. So there's a lot that needs to be done on the data collection front. And I think Executive Order 22 is a good start in that regard. And so it's really exciting to see the life cycle analysis methodology that you guys are working on as part of that.
Thank you.
So stepping back a little bit, all three of you have been working in this space for a little while, and I think it's worth noting that while it's a little bit nascent on the sort of methodological side, it's less so in terms of the solutions or the reductions. And I mentioned in the introduction that there's a lot of low-hanging fruit in this space, right? Why? Because nobody's looked at it before, nobody's done anything about it, and now that we're starting to do these life cycle analyses and starting to be able to identify carbon hotspots in buildings or projects where a lot of emissions are associated with a specific material, we're starting to also be able to see what really matters for reduction. So are there other projects or maybe lessons learned from the work that you've seen in New York or elsewhere that you think are worth highlighting?
I could, this is just a recent conversation we had, but I think, I think to your point, there are a lot of lessons learned. I think that, from the forestry industry, that's what I heard from the forestry experts. They were like, well, why don't we just, for starters, quantify what we have? Maybe we'll find we have a lot of low carbon products and we're ahead of the game. But when you look at all the supply that's needed, the volumes can get large, right? And then there's competition for raw materials. And recently we had discussions with, one example, the Danish Energy Agency, and they were, talking about how they would form these industrial parks with like 20 some odd companies, right? Where the waste of one goes to the feed of the other. The waste heat from one goes to the heating and the industrial process of the other. And they have that kind of interesting optimization routine for siting them, right? So we know we need more power, we need more energy, but they can kind of go together with some of these raw materials, and we don't know which is the winning horse, right? But we see timber, carbon, concrete going down. We see steel also. There's options. There's aluminum, right? So there's like these different threads, but all of them have like these multifaceted challenges of the whole supply chain. And, I think the conversation that I see coming back to ones we've had previously is like, we need like these depots that were like temporary storage of where you put stuff, because eventually it will have value once it can be economically utilized in that end use, but we don't have it now. So I think that's one space I'm interested for countries that have been able to, like, say, make decisions quickly about these things, sort of have the investment complement the policy very quickly. So I think that's a space that's interesting to explore, because it speaks to embodied carbon, it speaks to co-use of a lot of the raw materials as well. So how much can you get out of this raw material feedstock, right? You can get some fuel, some building material, some other things too, right? That's what I'm interested in. And actually, just as a plug, we're also thinking about what does our funding portfolio look like for the next 5 years, right? We've put in our own high-level proposals to get approval for that. And so we're really looking to reach out to the community in the next year to get ideas of what we should prioritize in our funding portfolio, consistent with the allowances that we have from the Public Service Commission and from the Regional Greenhouse Gas Initiative, which is where we get our funding from. So I'll close on that one.
I think maybe to follow the thread of data transparency and its immense value in enabling circularity, what we're learning through the implementation of our circular construction guidelines is actually, there are mechanisms through EPDs or LCAs to surface the embodied carbon of raw materials or of projects that are just being constructed, but what's the enabling mechanism to do that for an existing building before it's deconstructed? So through our guidelines, we're introducing new deliverables, including a waste minimization tracker, and a lot of that is geared towards really pushing our teams to think about what is the embodied labor, the carbon, and the energy of a site before you go in to deconstruct it, and also standardizing a lot of that data to ensure that you know what's happening on one site. You can also match that demand for a potential other project that might be on the docket like a couple months down the line. So for us, a lot of it is data transparency. What we're thinking about, though, is the types of data that's really important in order to assign different types of value to existing materials. So yes, we can collect quantitative data when it comes to the volume of a material, its embodied carbon. Then how do you go on to assign an economic value on the resale market to that volume of material? I think there is some innovation that needs to happen there, and probably a lot of partnership with stakeholders across the supply chain as well.
I think for designers too, one of the biggest low-hanging fruits I've seen is around how we write our specifications for concrete and products like that. Performance-based specifications always kind of trump prescriptive specs, and what we found in talking to different suppliers on the East Coast for concrete is that you can specify a 20% reduction from NRMCA, that's the National Regionals Manufacturers of Concrete, 20% below their benchmark values, and have no cost premiums associated with your project. And so now at Arup, our
Can we stop for that?
Yeah.
Just for a second? Can you say that one more time?
20% below the benchmark and no cost premium. So what we found at Arup is now we're just including this in our sort of standard spec language for products in this region, because it's a win-win. You know, you get a lower carbon building and you don't have to pay any extra for it.
Yeah, I think that's pretty amazing, and I think that those who've worked in like the energy efficiency space would just be like, what? And I think rightly so.
Right, a lot of people wouldn't believe it, but it's good to have those studies out there.
Yeah, and in fact, a Rocky Mountain Institute study found that in the commercial space, it's possible for a 40% reduction from concrete at less than 1% of the project costs, which again, from the energy efficiency space, these are just sort of like astounding reduction numbers. And to me, it's kind of insane that we're not all doing this. And so it's great to hear that Arup has kind of integrated these standard specs for a 20% reduction over the NRMCA values. Who here knows what NRMCA is? And we've got, okay, so a smattering here. NRMCA, the National Concrete Ready Mix Association, so they have their members share information on their concrete mixes and the emissions of their concrete mixes, and then they publish regional values that show what those averages are. And so myself and my colleague at OGS, when we put out the guidelines for low carbon concrete for New York State, we referenced those as well and had intentionally set those standards high as a way of getting people into the habit of submitting EPDs. I see some heads nodding in this room for folks that are implementing that, to be able to start producing environmental product declarations for those mixes and then ratcheting those down over time, which is best practices. Which is best practice and what our colleagues in Canada have done. So it's really exciting, I think, to hear that Arup is doing that. And in fact, the Port Authority also has established lower values that are part of their standard specs. And the GSA at the federal level, before the administration switchover, also included lower values in their general specifications, which have not yet perhaps been noticed by the current administration. So lots of exciting examples of instances where agencies and authorities are starting to incorporate these reductions. So I think just one more question. How much time do we have? Just a few minutes? Oh, 9 minutes. Okay, we've got time. Okay, maybe, see. More than I thought. Okay. Is from a policy standpoint, kind of knowing what you do and having worked in this space, what do you think is most important? What would you most like to see? And maybe let's start with Joe this time.
Yeah, sure. So another sort of research project that we've done in the past year with Arup is we sort of did a kind of a broad study on suppliers of reused materials, not concrete, but things like reused doors, timber, and manufacturers across the United States. And one of the questions that we were asking them on these interviews was, what would make your life easier? What do you need more supply of material? Do you need greater transparency into what's coming out of buildings? And they agreed with those things. But I think the biggest thing that they all sort of cited was that demand is necessary. They'll find a way to find more supply of their materials, and they can get in touch with more people or find more buildings that are coming down. But for something like reuse, it's hard to find the demand for it because people see it as novel. Coming back to specifications, people don't know how to specify reused material, and the procurement and project management process for it is really different, which is why the EDC guidelines are so great. It's baked into the project management process for that. And so I think we need to start to create incentives for people to be able to try this out on projects. And it's great to see that there are some incentives in the pipeline in some of our assembly bills. So,
What other incentives do you think are needed?
I might.
Come back to you.
Yeah.
Okay.
Thank you.
If we're going down the line, yes, incentives, yes to demand. I think I'd like to tie that back to more pilot projects. And this is a really great point in the action plan and a key recommendation that the working group is putting together. To facilitate demand, I think also it only works if you can guide teams through how to meet really ambitious targets. And the Spark project is enabling a lot of key learnings. I think each project is unique because it's tackling specific materials with specific site constraints, specific levels of expertise brought on by project teams. And because that varies across projects, we need more of them to come online simultaneously to share that learning between each other. So I think what we're looking for is more partnerships and more public projects that are willing to do this alongside EDC, and also the funding support to allow those pilots to produce the case studies in order to share those lessons learned more broadly.
Great. So I heard funding for case studies, yes, and also commitment to doing these types of projects and sharing of information. Well, just putting that out there for the folks that are wondering what can be helpful. Okay, Ziggy.
Yeah, I don't know if I have a wish list of policy. I mean, I think it's great, all the work that's being done. It kind of complements us putting out innovation challenges and funding opportunities that try to meet the goals, meet and exceed, right? I think the pilot projects are great, right, where we can collaborate, informally in that way. And I think that, events like this and getting together and sharing notes and all the information sharing, easier ways to find doing that. And I think that, for the projects that in our portfolio, that type of networking would be especially good as they're coming towards the end of the project and they're looking for that next round of funding to scale up. And that's where, growing the demand, the pilot projects that are high visibility at the right location could help stimulate the demand and say, we have data that shows that this works well, right? It's feasible. There's potential for scaling it. It's better than the incumbents. How do we then unlock, funding and the rest of the tools needed to get that to scale, right? Especially when you're talking about building out manufacturing facilities, it's a lot to ask. There's many steps to actually to get something to scale. And it could be existing solutions, right, that we're not aware of. How do we get more of that, right? What are we missing? So a little bit of rambling because I didn't have a clear answer to your question about policy, but I think it's all great what's happening, basically.
All right, well, I think this is super helpful. And one thing I want to note is there's a lot of representation here from the public sector, but we don't have anyone on this panel from the private sector. And many of you, I know, are working on some really exciting projects. And there's a lot in terms of fantastic case studies in New York State and here in New York City. And maybe just to end this panel, if you could raise your hand if you're currently working on a project that involves embodied carbon, and maybe we'll just take raise your hand high. Maybe take the transition time to just turn to a person next to you and tell them about it, and maybe, form a little group. And I guess the purpose here is just to show how much is happening in this space and has been done so far in addition to what all is possible. Thank you, everyone. Thank you to the panelists.
right on schedule. Everyone, if you need to leave, do so quickly. And if not, we're going to keep the party going with our innovators panel. So if everyone could come up. Let's get started. All right, let's keep the to the end. We'll continue with the amazing conversations at the end, but we'll throw it to our innovators.
Okay, I'm told we're not taking a break, so let's just get in.
Okay, I'll go right next
Yeah, who are we missing? Chris?
Yeah. What? Yeah. Oh, she's right here.
Oh. All right, we're looking for our last panelist. Perfect. Just a brief intro. Thank you. I know we're not taking a break. I know that's hard, but let's keep on going here. So I'll briefly introduce myself. I'm Yasmin Kologlu. I'm the AIA's co-chair in the committee on the environment in New York City, and also I'm a principal at HKS and regenerative design director. But in addition to that, I believe I got sucked into the innovation world at some stage back in the day, about 5-10 years ago. I think the first one was actually when I moved back to the US from the UK. I was working with Chris on LECLA, bill that you heard about earlier about concrete. And I got to meet some of these amazing people here through that process since then. We keep on hearing about how we can make a difference, and innovative materials are part of that. And I think professional organizations, startups, as well as nonprofits, government organizations, and private sector have a huge role to play here. And that's what I think we're going to talk about a little bit here. But I'm going to pass it on to you guys to introduce yourselves, and then we'll kick it off.
Awesome. Thank you very much. And of course, thank you for the organizers for allowing me to come talk about myself, of course, but of course the grander vision of why I'm here, which is Queen's Carbon. So I'm the CEO and co-founder of Queen's Carbon. We're a 3-year-old low-carbon cement startup. And so I'm going to rewind all the way back. I'm not going to take up too much time, I promise. Where my origin story came from. I came from a university called Rutgers University, just across the river in New Jersey. I was studying something called hydrothermal chemistry. Nothing to do with cement. I was developing transparent armor materials. But the theme of the group turned out to be sustainability, and it turned out to be low carbon, low energy. And so really, I don't think of myself as a material science PhD. I don't think of myself as a hydrothermal chemist. I was like beat into my brain. Embodied energy before it was a popular term. Embodied carbon before it was a popular term. And it turned out that as fate would have it, my story changed, and I wasn't allowed anymore to work on transparent armor because funding dried up. But we were able to pivot the technology into sustainability, into low carbon cement. And I saw, as I was getting going, I saw that a lot of startups are popping up, raising enormous amounts of money. And I used my playbook. I learned a lot about embodied energy. I learned a lot about embodied carbon. And I looked, and I'll paint you guys a picture. There's an x-axis and a y-axis. On the x-axis, it's energy. On the y-axis, it's carbon, CO2 footprint. So the higher you get in embodied energy, the higher you get naturally in embodied carbon. And on the lowest possible side of that graph, so the lowest energy per ton and the lowest carbon per ton is cement. On the highest end, you could imagine platinum, palladium, gold. Somewhere in the middle, there's fuels, plastics, metals like aluminum, et cetera, magnesium. And I looked at it, okay, I'm like, why are we innovating in cement? It's already optimized. It's the lowest possible energy per unit ton. It's the lowest possible CO2 per unit ton. What's the problem? Well, the main problem is we use so much cement, and that causes a giant carbon footprint. And then I'm looking at all these solutions out there that are really gaining traction and saying I have a robust future in terms of scale up and commercialization, but they're really playing in the aluminum field. They're really playing in the magnesium field. They're not going to do as much as we hope they will to make a nice low carbon future. And that's where really the motivation for me to leave the university and take the technology that we're working on at Queen's Carbon came, which is we truly believe that we have a low carbon, low energy, and low cost pathway to commercializing a zero green premium free cement. And so at Queen's Carbon, we call ourselves the instant pot of cement manufacturing. So instead of making cement the traditional way, which is in a hot open fire, like in your pizza oven, now we're in the instant pot. We have a steam and pressurized system that uses that steam as a catalyst to lower the temperature of cement production and make cement. And we found a unique way to make a cement and a partial cement near or zero carbon. Without much modification to the supply chain, without almost any modification to the raw material feedstock. So what am I saying? I'm saying minimal disruption. And maybe I'll talk more about it as we go. But the main emphasis there is I'm grateful to be here, and I really want us to build a robust future. And that robust future, of course, comes with policy, but the technology has to be ready for that political change.
Sure, thank you. Hi, everybody. I'm Cindy McLaughlin. I'm the Chief Sustainability Officer of Carbon Built. And just to back up a little bit, raise your hand if you understand why concrete is carbon intensive. All right, it's almost everybody. So, it's because cement, which is concrete's binding ingredient, and 10 to 15% of the concrete mix is highly carbon intensive, although maybe not as much as gold, apparently. Per unit ton. So you can solve that problem in two ways. One is by decarbonizing the production of cement itself, and the other way is by using a lot less of it and replacing it with other materials like waste materials. And so Carbon Built, my company, does the latter. Since our spin out from UCLA in 2020, we have innovated in creating a cocktail of industrial byproduct materials that combine together to mimic the properties of cement. And so with our mix, we call it Reversa Binder, we can reduce the carbon footprint of concrete right away by roughly 50%. Now, in plants that we own, which we're starting to do, we can go a lot further. We can invest holistically in decarbonization across that plant. Now, we play in concrete masonry, and so we do not do ready mix. We make blocks, we make CMU, we make SRW, or segmental retaining wall. And the benefit of doing what we do in a controlled manufacturing environment is that you actually have control. You can watch, you have quality control. You can make much deeper reductions than you often can in a ready mix environment. So thank you, excited to be here.
So cool. Ziggy, can I start you off with a little pass the pot here? So, what's that? Yeah. Put it on your,
Just drink it, drink it.
Put it on your cheese. Yes, please do.
Break in case of emergency.
Right. So that jar that's being passed around is carbon negative pound for pound. It's a fixed carbon material. It's clean enough to be used in food containers in Europe and US, and in baby clothing. It's actually coloring my shirt here, and I might give it away, but it's made from sewage sludge. So in the US, everywhere that we're making sewage sludge, so everywhere, the resulting material at the end of wastewater treatment has to get paid to get rid of and get managed. In the US, about 30% of it goes to landfill and goes straight to methane. In New York, it's 68% as of 2018. So it's more than double the national average of how much gets landfilled. And if you don't put it in landfill, then you have to use it some other way, and so it gets spread on land where everything that's in the sewage sludge, from heavy metals to PFAS and forever chemicals to pharmaceuticals, goes into our crops and our food and our water. So that all results in a tipping fee that costs municipalities, right? So I'm getting to concrete, don't worry. Bioforce Tech is a company I work for, has a system that can basically dry the material using bacteria instead of natural gas, and then convert it through this high heat with no oxygen into this material. So now we have this thing that has been proven by the EPA to destroy PFAS, so it's PFAS free. It has the carbon that was available that could become methane or CO2 has now been fixed into these really tight bonds that won't break down for over 1,000 years, so that's why it's carbon negative. It's removed from that fast cycle. And it was seen, it's a biochar as far as a class of material, but it was seen as basically a bad biochar, right? If you're making biochar from wood, you have this really high carbon content, these certain characteristics. This has a very unique characteristics. And it turns out that you can actually leverage those characteristics to store carbon in the built environment pound for pound without harming performance at all. So we can replace aggregates in concrete. We can also replace cement with a different technology, post-processing, to be able to really open up the circular city. So what's unique for me is that I'm really straddling a lot of sectors. I'm dealing with municipalities and wastewater, tipping fees, and then into concrete in the built environment and through fashion, automotive, things like this. But you can see where policy really plays a role for us in bringing these new sectors together.
Perfect, thank you. Grishma?
Hi, everyone. My name is Grishma Garikota. I'm a faculty member at Columbia University. I just started at Columbia 3 months ago, but before that, I was a faculty member at Cornell. And I direct the Sustainable Energy and Resource Recovery Group. We do a lot of work in our group thinking very intentionally about multiple emission streams, not just CO2, not just construction demolition waste, but actually thinking in a very integrated manner about multiple emission streams and how we can make high-value products out of them. So early on, I want to say sometime in 2019 or so, my group started working on reactive CO2 capture mineralization technologies. Basically, it's a fancy word for saying we started to capture CO2 from very dilute streams using a very accelerated capture approach. And instead of producing high purity CO2, which is typically what a lot of CO2 capture technologies do, we actually started converting that into solid carbonates. It actually worked. We were quite successful. The rates at which we were mineralizing were much, much faster and better compared to what was already in literature. So some of our DOE and other program directors looked at us and they were like, well, what are you going to do with this? Are you just going to publish a paper and forget about it? Or are you actually going to do something with it? So that's when, I guess I had to subdue the academic in me and elevate the entrepreneur in me. And that's when we created Carbon to Stone. It's a spun out of my research group. We started to capture and convert CO2 in multiple emission streams, including construction demolition waste. We have an ARPA-E grant on that. Steel slags, cement kiln dust, dross, which is produced as a byproduct of secondary aluminum production. So we started taking a lot of these metal-rich alkaline residues. We started stripping out the high-value metals so we could put that back into the metal markets or even send it back to the companies where these residues were being produced so they can be reused in alloying materials. And we produced the calcium and magnesium carbonate-rich materials, which we then started to integrate into construction. So this company I co-founded in 2022, really kicked off operations in 2023, very close to piloting the technology in collaboration with industry partners in cement and iron and steel. So very grateful to support from NYSERDA, Ziggy's program included, for helping seed some of these efforts. So in addition to some of the patents on CO2 capture mineralization, we also have some patents on metal recovery. And together, we are able to fractionate all of these complex residues in a much, much more effective manner and produce high-value products. So thanks for having me.
Perfect, thank you. So I have a little surprise for our panelists that they don't know. I'm so sorry, guys, but I'm kind of known to be a change maker, but also troublemaker a little bit. So I'm going to scratch all the questions that we prepared for you. And I realized that we're the ones standing between you, your drinks, and your dinner. So we're going to try to, spice this up a little bit, see how that goes. Okay, but first question is going to be easy for all of us, okay? So what would be interesting to hear is you're all working, we are living in a period of time where there was a lot of talk about concrete is dead, its emissions are so high, it cannot innovate itself, yet each one of you describing a process or material change or an alternative that could actually revolutionize the way we do work. And I think we all know that there's not a single solution, but there are multiple solutions in this. So I'm curious to hear from each one of you, how did you get into what you're doing? What inspired you? And what keeps you going in this space? And why are you doing what you're doing?
I guess I'll kick it off quickly. And I alluded a little bit to it earlier, what inspired me. I think what inspired me was that there were solutions coming to market, but we recognized that those solutions will not exist beyond one plant. And this is not a game of one plant, it's a game of thousands of plants globally. And cement is the lowest cost man-made material there is, right? Cement, dirt, water. Like this is what we're talking about. So you really have to be. It's not just not just creativity on the innovation side. It's creativity of how you deploy it as well. It's creativity of which stakeholders you engage. It's across the value chain. And I think what we did, of course, we started the company with an innovation. We started the company with a good idea, but we were really looking for, and I'm pivoting the answer a little bit, but. We were looking for a market signal. What can we do that will provide the cement companies out there a competitive advantage? And I think one of the things we started realizing is today, I'll give an example. In the clinker space, or in the concrete space, the cement fraction, 80% cement, 20% SCM, give or take. SCM is a partial cement replacement like fly ash, slag. And even today, there's a capacity crunch for that SCM component. But longer term, every single cement player in the world is saying, I want to replace, or rather, every decarbonization play in the world is saying, I want more SCMs to lower my clinker factor, to decarbonize, get rid of the high emissions component. Except the capacity will never be there for more SCMs to be there. So there is a world where instead of having 80% clinker and 20% SCM, it's actually 20% clinker and 80% SCM. If we reach that world and that 80% is SCM and it's carbon neutral, to be honest, nobody's going to care in this room about that remaining 20%. We're not going to be focused on the cement sector at all. So what we realized is that there's a market signal that the cement companies are already beginning to realize that they need to control the SCM market. Otherwise, clinker factor goes down, revenues go down, they're in big trouble. And so what we've realized, and maybe that's part of the innovation where it gets so fun too, it's not just the innovation, it's also how you're reading these companies. And maybe two more comments there. CRH is one of the biggest cement companies in the world. They're vertically integrated. They just purchased for $2.1 billion an SCM company. Heidelberg did something similar 2 years ago with CIFA Technologies. This is happening in real time. They're securing their capacity to make sure they're alive as the industry decarbonizes. And with Queen's Carbon, we're prepared to step up and in their landscape, at their cement plant, allow them to make a carbon neutral SCM that can withstand that change in marketplace. And in my opinion, if the cement companies don't see that signal, and they do, we have two big case examples where they do see that, they won't exist longer term because other companies will begin to replace them. So anyway, what's so exciting, it's a very hard problem. And I think myself, my co-founder Dave, he's in the audience, Ahmed, our VP of Finance, is in the audience. We're all excited because we believe we're really on the right track with the right stakeholders. One last thing. Along the way, we got a lot of support, and one of those supports was ARPA-E Scale-Up. We won the ARPA-E $15 million Scale-Up grant from the Department of Energy, and that is allowing us to move very fast. We have a top 4 cement major partner that's piloting with us, investing into us, and has longer-term plans with us of where that first-of-a-kind demonstration plant will be located. So. What excites me is that this whole thing is really exciting. It's a really hard problem to crack, and we're here for it, and we'll make a robust future.
Great. I want to go to Garrett for a second. What inspired you to turn sludge into?
Yeah, very different story. I have a bachelor's in fine arts and a master's in industrial design. I was at Pratt, actually.
Relating to sludge, or? Yeah?
No, it was not at all. Sustainable materials, always interested in sort of the interface of what we make, how we make it, and what that says about us, and that feedback loop. I lived on the Gowanus Canal. It's disgusting. I was obsessed with it. And it's literally the toilet of the city. The city is an organism. It is shitting. That is where it comes out. And so I was really interested in how we can, use our values to have that material go away, have that reality be different. And I toured Newtown Creek wastewater plant during my thesis, and they were like, it's a gorgeous facility, by the way, like giant, 12-story digesters that are false stomachs that make part of the gas you cook your meals with in the city. There's a 7-year wait list to get married on top of them. They were like, yeah, here's the digester eggs, this is how this works, blah, blah, blah. We have this material we don't know what to do with, blah, blah, blah. I was like, what was that? And so biosolids became a really great embodiment of this sort of the way that we interface with what's disgusting and what's wasteful, what's dirty, right? So I thought I was thinking outside the box. I designed a pen and ink where the bioplastic for the pen body and the ink itself could be made out of biosolids. I worked with New York DEP for all the economics. I worked with bioplastic startups. I made the carbon from biosolids that I ordered off Amazon from Milwaukee on my girlfriend's roof in Bed-Stuy, and made little stamps of the ink. And it turned out someone was making the same carbon at commercial scale but had no use for it out in California. So that's how I got here.
That's a good journey right there.
Yeah,
Okay.
yeah, and I do think why I stay is because the way that this really zips up all these things together, I think that this does move the social compass in a direction that it needs to move. And so for me, it is about this material, but also what this material opens the door for things to come in that are way easier on the social spectrum for being okay with.
Yeah, that's right. Maybe Cindy next.
Sure. Well,
Sorry, I'm going to interrupt for a second. So I just want to say also that Cindy knows what kind of troublemaker I can be. So I think she's prepared because Cindy is actually, in addition to her role here, she's also one of the co-chairs of ULI's Climate and Sustainability Council that we co-chair together. So she knows what to expect, I think.
That's right. Okay, so it probably won't surprise you to know that I did not think as a little girl that I was going to be making cinder blocks for a living. Like, it's not that sexy. What I love about my job is that it is constantly changing. And so when I first got to Carbon Built 5 years ago, I nerded out about concrete. I didn't understand how amazing it was and how beautiful it was and how much it's like baking bread. And I was into that. What I nerd out about now is the business model. And the thing about innovating in a low margin commodity industry is that you have massive companies with massive scale, multinational companies, and they beat you on everything, right? They beat you on the price of raw materials. They beat you on the cost of their equipment. Their access to finance is infinite and yours is zero, right? I mean, concrete is not a contracted industry. And so you sell everything into the spot market, which means that you can't go to a bank and get a loan because you have no forward revenues. And so the thing I love about my job is both coming up with creative ways to make sure that we have those forward revenues, and in this case, it's carbon monetization and book and claim system and being involved in all these very esoteric and, sort of hard to understand, even for me, systems. But then also to help my company think about how we get to the kind of scale that, how do we start competing on a level playing field with the CRHs of the world? And when we started at Carbon Built, we thought we were going to be selling our Reversa binder to other existing concrete masonry producers. And we did that for a while. But we realized that we didn't have control over how fast they were moving. They didn't necessarily want to push the envelope on carbon reductions, so they would do maybe a 35% reduction instead of more than that. And as we were touring these concrete plants, we realized that we could have a much bigger impact if we went and just bought the plants ourselves. So we did that. We bought a plant in Connecticut. So if any of you here are building in New England, come talk to me. We are, as we speak, producing ultra low carbon concrete out of Connecticut. We've made, between our own plant and the plants that we've served, we've made about 50,000 tons of concrete masonry to date. So our concrete masonry does not cost more. It performs at parity to traditional product. It's being slipstreamed into the value chain as we speak. So at the concrete plant that we bought in Connecticut, we are on track to get to about 70% carbon footprint reductions because of all the other investments we're making in that plant to reduce waste, concrete itself, so actually using less concrete to make a given product, and cement. So I have been learning how to do M&A, and that's what gets me up in the morning because it's really fun and really exciting, and that's how we scale. That's how we get to, we do a lot of M&A, Goldman Sachs-like, and we get to scale.
Was that your dream when you were a little girl?
Also not my dream.
Okay,
but
got it.
but I'm digging it.
Grishma?
So I'm trained as a chemical engineer, not trained as a civil engineer, a structural engineer, a materials engineer. So I like to think in terms of reactions, equations, chemicals, value, right? A large processing plant, scale. That was my conventional training. And then when I first started to look at the cement space, it was like, why am I even here? Like the margins are razor thin, the emissions are super high. The competition in this space is just so fierce. But then I realized that there's the other side of cement making, which is all of these other additional materials like SCMs that you're talking about that go into cement that are actually a lot more interesting from all of these criteria, from the criteria of competition, scale, cost savings, economics, everything. And so that's when we started thinking about, can we actually make construction material much, much more cost competitive compared to what it is right now? And one way to do that is to source our emissions, right? If you can source CO2 on which you don't really have a price, but then you have to pay in terms of the capture costs and the energy costs. And if you can source all the material that's actually going to landfills, not pay that tipping fees, keep those industrial residues out of the landfill and then send them into construction instead, that would be a huge saving, right? So started to really look at this whole construction space and started deconstructing, literally, no pun intended, all the different components that go into this complex space. And that's where we realized there is a competitive edge to be played here, at least from a purely numbers perspective. From a sheer creativity perspective, I mean, that's just off the charts, right? Because now everything is up for grabs in terms of how you make your construction, in terms of how you make your material mix, in terms of how you build your reactor system, in terms of how you scale, whether you want to have a more modular system, whether you want to have a more scaled up version, and also in terms of business models. Are we setting ourselves up to be taken over by a large cement company? Do we want to be standalone? There's so much innovation also in the business modeling side of things. So it felt like a very, very creative space where I could actually bring in a lot of my skills and, more importantly, learn and create. Right? There's not a lot of sectors where you can do that, particularly the traditional chemical space, but construction is a rich space. And the fact that all of us need a place to live and stay, and the population is growing, simply puts an onus on us to actually start thinking more intentionally about the built environment around us.
Great, thank you. Okay, now comes the more interesting part. So what we're gonna do right now is we're gonna change those questions, and what I'm gonna do, I'm gonna play the devil's advocate. I'm gonna come up with a series of statements that I definitely do not believe in. They're totally false, and I'm just saying them to be provocative here, and I would like the panelists to react to what I'm saying and explain a little bit more about why what you're doing is actually proving what I'm saying wrong, basically. And somebody told me earlier when I suggested this that they said, oh my God, somebody's gonna crop those videos and actually use them on Instagram or something, saying that Yasmin said this publicly. So they're false. I don't believe in anything I'm gonna say now.
No more videos.
No, yeah, well, they're recording it, it's gonna be available, so good luck. But okay, let's do it anyways. Let's say, hypothetically, I'm an architect, I work as an architect, and everything you're telling me sounds all cool, but it just sounds a bit out there. It just sounds a little bit hypothetical. I'm not sure if any of this is scalable or transferable, or I can't even use them in my project. Go ahead.
You can go first.
Well, so we've made 50,000 tons of concrete already, so it is there, it is out there, and they're being used in hundreds of development projects today. Yeah. There you go. So shut up.
Love it.
Yeah, we have 5 installations between the US and Italy that have the full system, 22 that are just biodryers for now because Italy doesn't have legislation yet for pyrolysis. But I'm sold out and need to make more material. So please spec it.
Please spec it, got it.
I think the onus is on us to prove it. I think we as innovators, we have to prove that this technology is scalable. We have to prove that it's low cost and it's accessible and deployable. And so we're 3 years old. Of course, I can't say that I've emanated a plant just yet. But what I can say is that the technology has to be ASTM certified. And number 2, of course, there has to be some corporate out there that's your champion. And so our track record is we do have that corporate. That corporate is Bootsy Unisem USA. We have support all the way to the top in that organization, from the global CEO and CTO to the domestic USA CEO. And they're fans of the technology, and we will get additional fans as we grow the team. We're a team of 20 now in New Jersey. We hope to engage New York at some point in our near future. But we're going to bring USA green manufacturing without a green premium. That's our goal. And it's truthfully, that's a great point. It's our problem to solve, and we have to keep solving it until there's widespread market adoption. And it's an uphill battle, but with the right market approach, we can do this.
I'd say we did the numbers, and our economics are favorable. We've tested our materials in the lab, and they seem to be holding up just fine, and they seem to have better compressive strength than what we had anticipated. We've tested out our business models. We've tested out our business hypotheses, and there still appears to be a need for a technology even 2 years after we started the company. So it means that there's a genuine need. And isn't that what it takes for a business to survive? A genuine need, a good product, and making sure that we're keeping our word and delivering on our promises. And that's what we're doing.
I just want to add, because I think there's a lot more real-world versions of this, which is, hey, this is awesome. I'm so glad to know about it. Maybe next time, right? Because people are in mid-project design phase or even towards construction are like, oh yeah, sustainability. What do we have on deck? Okay, well, let's do a lunch and learn. Okay, well, not this project. It's too late. And we did a project with SOM in the Bay Area where the end goal was like, look, let's try it. Worst case, we're in everybody's system and we have you in procurement and blah, blah, blah. And that's progress. And it's in the concrete in that project. So I think also saying, hey, let's just start. Let's try, let's get in the system, you flex these muscles, you'll learn how to do it. And a lot of times that project does go to completion anyway.
Right. So next one is, okay, that's great, I hear everything you're saying, but I'm an architect and I just feel like I don't even know how to call you, reach you, and I don't know how you can help me. How am I reaching you, how am I calling you, what can you do for me?
917? No. I think the general answer is, and all of us will have a slightly different answer because we're slightly different in the value chain of how the architect even communicates with us. We believe in the traditional approach. The cement producer services the ready mix supplier, and then there's architects and contractors that take it from there. We want to do the same thing. So you'll hear about Queen's Carbon because the cement producer will be blending our product into their cement mixture, just like they're blending limestone in today to get a slightly lower clinker CO2 footprint of their produced cement. They'll be blending in Queen's Carbon cement. Coming your way by the ton in 2026, by the 10 tons in 2027, and by the 1,000 tons a day in 2029. So we have a pretty good pathway now. We've funding secured for the first part there, for the 1 ton and the 10 ton. 1,000 tons, please, anybody in the audience who wants to communicate with us of how to finance this really, really large plant, let's talk, yeah.
Great. Anyone else? I think you kind of explained that. You have plans already that you're doing this, so,
Yeah, check out our website.
Yeah. I would add that, I think this is also a very normal scenario, and we talked about in yesterday's panel, Gensler, about the AEC community actually being maybe more governmental than some of our government right now, that there's a lot of checks and balances and that an architect can only spec, right? And an owner can only pay, and then it has to actually get procured through what is feasible from the engineer and the concrete producer. So I've really enjoyed the difficulty of proposing the bill here and only if it passes, then here too. Like it's very similar to what we heard in the legislature, in the assembly, for the state. And so we need your vote to be able to have the bill on the docket for the structural side to take a look, right? Because their job is to say yes or no, not to say what, right? So there is a role, even though you're not going to write me the check for the material.
Yeah, I mean, you're also right. I think you're talking effectively about push and pulls. You guys are pushing the industry, right? With your innovation, you're growing, you're scaling up your transferable technologies, but also there's the pull side that we need, both from the industry, but also from the legislators, that we need that pull to bring those to market quicker, enable you to do your work, etc. So I think and I think all of us on this, in the audience actually have a key role to play here. And I know that AIA is quite active on that too. So we can all take a role on that. I don't think there's ever too much we can do. So let's get on that. But coming back to that, so I'm going to put my devil's advocate again. And I don't believe what I'm saying again, so bear with me. I hear you, but you're talking to me about some material that's using biosolids. Like, I don't even know if is that healthy? Am I gonna use this in my building? Am I gonna have a health issue? And yours is even weirder. It's like mineralized CO2. I don't even know what that is. Is it black? What do I do with that? Am I gonna get sued for using some crazy sludge or some mineralized carbon thing?
Well, I would say that our materials actually lock up a lot of the metals that you don't want your kids to be playing around with, and you're actually sticking it in construction material, and there's multiple layers before you can actually get to the underlying construction material anyway. So it's actually a much, much safer way to be locking up the metals rather than having your kid play with some random materials on the sidewalk and to accidentally put stuff that has metals in them. So in many ways, we're stripping out some of the metals that need to go back into alloying and returning them to the places where they need to be returned to. And we're using other metals like the calcium and magnesium, which need to be in construction anyway, and we're making sustainable construction materials. So in many ways, we actually making construction materials safer for you. And we're also keeping materials out of the landfill. And we are leaving behind a much better and safer environment than our previous generations. So it's a win-win on all accounts.
The baby clothing thing, the food containers, that spiel is usually what I bring out for, we'll share that testing. And also, to your point on ASTM testing, we don't fit in ASTM categories. So, like, you're absolutely right. We're not ASTM certified in anything because we're not sand and we're not cement and we're not, et cetera, et cetera. So I have like a hefty phone book of structural testing, rapid chloride, penetration, 70 years worth of freeze thaw, et cetera, to back that up as far as the liability. I want to replace cement, right? Like that's where the carbon footprint is. I'd like to explain concrete as a chocolate chip cookie or an oatmeal raisin cookie. If the cement is the flour, right, we're replacing the chocolate chips. And if you think about being a baker and you've got like your pristine cookie, the right, fluffiness, crispiness, whatever, if you're going to change the flour, we need to talk. But if you have a different chocolate supplier, it's probably okay. And so we are seeing that our carbon is really fit for first pilots to open the door for sustainable material because they're not as afraid of changing a few of the chocolate chips than they are of remaking the whole cookie and what holds it together. So it's a really low liability way to implement that material.
I think the point is that you've actually thought about these things, and there's credible plans and safety measures in place. That these are not hypothetical. They're not, as I was suggesting, these are not hypothetical, and these are not as experimental as maybe we used to think back in the day.
Maybe just to add quickly, it's awesome to see architects prescribing new materials and experimenting with new compositions, right? It's awesome to see Meta, Microsoft, Amazon doing low carbon procurement agreements, right? But that's less than 1% or less than 1% what we're looking for. And so we're going to get to a world, it's not today, but we're going to get to a world where low carbon, so what? Everybody's low carbon, right? And so you really have to compete everywhere else. So we want to really, as a unit and as a solution and as a technology and as a business unit, get to a place where We're competing on cost, not on carbon, because everybody's low carbon, and that's where I think we're headed as a country, or rather as a society, as we decarbonize the unit operations of every operation. So to the architect. To be honest, you might not even know who Queen's Carbon is. The solution will be decarbonized before it even hits your desk. That's the goal, right? That's the way to do this. For procurement agreements, it cannot be the case. These procurement agreements catalyze the industry. They're catalyzing us to go forward. We're huge champions of that. But longer term, yeah, I could tell you, I went to Washington, D.C. with the Portland Cement Association, and the senators didn't know what Portland Cement was or who this association was. To be honest, maybe that's how it should be, right? And that's going to happen again for the low carbon solution, where it's so like in the background, but already low carbon. That's going to come.
Great, thank you. So another thing that I'm not sure if I fully believe in is that US is totally behind. I don't know if that's true anymore, because we have a lot of innovation coming out of our ground here, and the scale and the funding that we have available to us is it's a greater scale than some of the other locations who are known to be progressive, let's say. So I want to ask Cindy, one is you've been in the market for some time, several years now, and I know that having a new idea or startup or a new business requires being agile and transforming your strategy as well as approach. Can you tell us a little bit more about what it takes from your eyes, and if there's anything that this crew can help you guys do better with that?
Yeah, so it's a great question. We have absolutely pivoted from, just selling our binder to other people to owning our own plants. And the reason we did that is because there is a tried and true roll-up style business strategy that investors understand, right? If we go in and just run the plants better, irrespective of whether or not we are deeply decarbonizing them, which we will, of course, but it's having a business model that works outside of the sort of carbon emission-y space. I say that with love. I am in the carbon emission-y space. But having a business model that works for traditional private equity style investors is really important. And I cannot emphasize that enough. We really spent a lot of time sort of pushing on walls, trying to figure out how to scale to be the size of CRH, and you have to do it by fitting into traditional investment models. So yeah, how you all can help? Specify us, buy our concrete, buy our carbon attributes, if you're in the market for carbon attributes. And those are, for those of you who aren't pickling in this crazy stuff, it is when you have a project that is far away from a low carbon concrete provider, you can actually buy the environmental attribute certificates of somebody like me or some of my colleagues here, essentially like buy their carbon benefits and apply them to your project. So that's an option if you don't have somebody in your area who's supplying you with concrete.
That's great, thank you for that. So I'm gonna ask one last question, and then maybe we see if the audience have any questions for you guys. So what are the space that you occupy? I don't know if you've heard of the term VUCA, is like volatile, uncertain, complex, and ambiguous. And I think many of you are in the space of an innovation startup is just that world, especially in the carbon emission-y world that we're in. I'm going to use that. What are some of your anxieties, and how can we, as a community of built environment professionals and other inventors or clients here, how can we help you overcome some of those anxieties? And also, I don't want to forget the policy realm in that also.
I'll go last.
Now it's the therapy session. What are your anxieties? Tell us about you.
I'd say we are anxious about many things. One of them is the fact that there really is a disappearing policy landscape. So earlier, for example, we had some semblance of policy guidance in terms of carbon removal credits and such, and in this evolving environment, that is looking very tenuous. So then the question becomes, we really have to now become a lot more market competitive, right, against our established players. And so we're going to keep getting asked how cost competitive we are. And so we actually have to absorb a lot of that thought processes around how large entities function and how we need to fit into the traditional investment models, right? So we can speak to how we are fitting in, but also how we are standing out with our technology. How we are fitting in terms of making ourselves palatable for investors, but also how we are standing out in terms of the differentiation that we bring to the marketplace. So those are things that are requiring us to lose sleep at night, iterate over and over again, making sure that we are being competitive, but also differentiated.
Yeah, I mean, just to sort of double down on the shifting policy environment, my anxiety is more banal, but it's like, okay, I'm called the Chief Sustainability Officer. Is that a good title anymore? Can I say carbon? There's some really dumb stuff. And that's, we're revamping our website. So actually, if you go to our website, wait a couple of weeks and we'll have a better one. But we're worrying about what are we putting on our website. So that's the level of, that's what we're talking about here.
I'll give maybe, we had similar, call it anxiety, I think, just a few months back. And we even brainstormed, do we change the name of our company? And I think what we landed on was no. Our vision is profitable decarbonization, and it has to stay that way. Without a profit-generating model, this does not work. So it has to be, private equity firms have to embrace it, VCs, traditional VC, non-traditional VC, everybody has to embrace it. So we remove that anxiety by just holding on strong to profitable decarbonization. And that's why we shout it. We're big fans of decarbonization as long as it's profitable. And not just for Queen's Carbon. Of course, we want to build big business and a successful, robust revenue-generating model. But longer term, everything has to work for the technologies at large. But maybe on a ground level, as an innovator, we're building a big team. I think a lot of folks here can agree with me. It takes an excellent rock star team to make everything work. And not getting the right person at the right time, your company's ruined. And so there's an operations thing that happens at any startup where, fortunately, I have an excellent co-founder. Like I said, he's over there, a serial entrepreneur, by the way, and investor. And of course, we have 18 awesome engineers and scientists that we're continuing to attract. If we can't do that, we're going to fail. But if we can continue doing that, attracting the right talent, giving them a compensation package that makes them come here, giving them the level of excitement that makes them come here, we'll get there. But so that's where the anxiety is. We really have to have the best possible team to outcompete. Number one, it's not even ourselves, right? We're not necessarily outcompeting ourselves. We're competing with the legacy way of doing things, and it's extremely complicated. I mentioned cement is the lowest energy per ton and the lowest CO2 per ton. It's very difficult to displace, if not impossible. If there wasn't just a few handful of good ideas, I would actually say it is impossible. But anyway, there's a light at the end of the tunnel, and that's what keeps everybody going, I think. And we're going to do it. We're going to do it. 2029.
We're going to fact check that after this panel, but we won't go there now. So, Garrett.
Yeah, I think, so for me, like I said, I'm involved in a lot of different sectors, and there's a lot of policy sliding back and forth for PFAS regulations in biosolids, landfill diversion, low carbon concrete. And I think my biggest fear, while we also have plants that are now fully operational between Pennsylvania, California, it's like there's a lot of what's happening today and then what's on the horizon that we don't want to miss if it comes by, or we don't want to tell people that we're around for. And so my biggest fear is taking the ball, the eye off the ball of what's going on right now, that, fires need to be put out and things need to be remaining smooth and keep our record clean and successful, while also being afraid that, for example, New York has a 5-year land application ban on the table right now, and they're already landfilling 68% of their biosolids. It's very easy for groups to say, well, there is no other option, and so we have to continue to land apply. And so if I miss that opportunity for comments, and I haven't made an impact here so that I can ask architects to say, yes, I will use that. And so there is actually, it's not just that we can make it, like it would get applied. That could change a massive 5-year ban that would change all of New York's biosolids management. So I think it's really hard to keep your eye on the horizon and on the sails on deck. And it's really easy to trip over a rope doing both. And so that's my biggest worry is not doing enough or trying to do too much.
Yeah. I mean, you're right. Also, you're all bridging that space between innovation and implementation, which is always a difficult one and multifaceted, as you're talking about. But it sounds like you're all doing amazingly well. So that's great to hear. Let's look at the audience. I don't know if you guys have questions. So maybe we take 2 questions before we finish today.
Hi, thank you. From a circular economy perspective, do your concretes, similarly to standard concretes, have the ability to be, when the building is demolished, turned into RCA?
Yes.
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 You know the answer.
Definitely, and more. I think from a recycling standpoint, a startup shouldn't really think about all of the unit operations in a supply chain. We should really focus on one. But to your point, there has to be an end of life in mind and what the next life looks like. So RCA, to be honest, I'm a bigger fan of rebirthing it as, assuming the landfill and logistics are in place, rebirth it as fresh concrete, or fresh cement rather. It's not just aggregate, but also the fines and regenerated fines. So that the future like that exists. I think we use the word urban mining. This future will exist, but the logistics have to be there. What we're focused on as a startup is not looking at rebuilding all supply chains worldwide. We're looking at specifically innovating on one step and then expanding from there. So anyway, touch and feel the cube after this, but low carbon cement.
Perfect. We have another question here.
Hi, thank you for this wonderful presentation. I have a question in regards to net zero carbon achievement by 2050. Do you think that goal is realistic? And should we move it sooner so then we feel this, emergency to do it? Or what do you think what we all should do in the whole chain of investors, architects, civil engineers in order to get there? Thank you.
Yeah, I can, sure. I do think that looking for multi-hitters, so we talk about impact feedstocks, so we need carbon removal in general. However, if you take like a virgin raw wood chip and convert it straight to biochar, you're skipping a lot of possibilities that can decarbonize other spaces. So being able to take something that's causing harm now, right? We're taking something that's going to landfill. That in a maximum avoidance is 24 tons of CO2 avoided per ton of material produced. And that is the biggest, like what we're doing now, as far as the removal space, is what needs to get smaller. And the smaller that gets, then the smaller the amount of removals we need to compensate for what's left. So there's a lot of focus on new tech of carbon removal, of direct air capture, things like that, and they need to scale, and so they need the most capital, but also like we just need to do less of the thing we do, right? And that is, it might not even be investable, like to under consume, So I think it's also like not just where do we put our money, like where do we just stop putting our money and hang out and be people?
That. Yes.
Great. Okay.
I mean, I'll add quickly. Traditionally I'm very optimist, right? But I think in this case, it's still optimistic, just maybe a little capitalistic there. If it's not profitable, it's not going to happen. It's impossible. Microsoft can only afford so much. Amazon can only afford so much. Meta can only afford so much. And so tax incentives might drive Western society to change. It will not be enough for global widespread adoption. Does anybody know how much the US represents in terms of cement production? It's a tiny, tiny fraction, right? Right. Maybe I think less than 5 now. But so it's a tiny, tiny fraction. The US taxpayer will not subsidize the global decarbonization. If the decarbonization pathway requires a green premium globally, right, which is normalized to each geography, it won't happen. So we really have to get very creative region by region to try to get it to happen. So the best we can do is just keep going lower. I think that's the best way we could take that step forward. With the right technologies, I'm optimistic, I said. We'll get there, but we have to have the right technologies in place.
Perfect. I think we're time. So I just want to thank our panelists and thank you for your grace as I changed the format without your knowledge, and thank you for reacting to my bunkers comments. And hopefully none of you are going to crop and edit those and then put them on YouTube or something. But it would be great if each one of you just say one sentence, short sentence, about what gives you hope right now. Maybe I'll start. Someone else go first. We're so far, I think what gives me hope is we're so far from the decarbonization goals we have, 2030, 2040, 2050, whatever you want to call it. Yet we are the closest that we've ever been also. And that gives me hope that, many of the solutions or things that you guys are doing also are moving us even a step closer. Yet we are far, yet we haven't been closer than today.
I think for me, I'm seeing people get skeptical of simple stories. They're like, it's the Uber of, or like, it's just this, but made from that. Yeah. That's all you have to do, and I think that the general vocabulary level, like the floor is rising for sure, and it's really hard, like I have a lot to explain. Yeah. And it's really hard to start at like CO2 is a molecule that, and that like a lot of the country doesn't know what CO2 is, like that's very true. So I think that I'm seeing in a given 8-minute call or 3-minute presentation, the bandwidth has expanded because the vocabulary is raised. And so that feels like something is working.
One sentence.
I am starting to see the word sufficiency in my daily life. So people starting to build sufficiently, but not excessively. And that gives me hope.
I wake up and I still see a need for our technology, right? We're still having companies reach out to us. Our pilots are going on track. Things are happening. That gives me hope, right? It's not dead yet, which means that you're still alive. So, keep doing what you're doing, right?
One sentence.
One long sentence. I think what gives me hope is the presence of competition, and we see it in the AI space, we see it in the data center space, we see it in the energy space, and we see it in the cement space. We need competition to continue uplifting and upskilling our own technologies to meet the low carbon future that we're all looking for. AI is competing, data centers are competing. Guess what that means? Electric grid is going to get upgraded, right? These are high dollar value players. Once that gets upgraded, there's a trickle down effect to all of the electrifiable solutions out there to decarbonize not just cement, but everything else abroad. And so competition across all of these tech spaces, including the material space, it's going to happen. This is just the capitalist society we live in. It's going to happen. Everybody wants a piece of the pie. We're all going to compete. Some are going to make it, some are not, but the competition will take us where we need to go. I'm 100% confident of that. Yeah.
That was a long sentence. We got it. Well, thank you everybody for joining us today. Hopefully you enjoyed the conversation. And thank you AIA and Center for Architecture also. Some of us are going to go to Half Pint across around the corner, if anybody would like to join and continue the conversation. For those of us, they have food, I'm told. Excellent, all right. I'm just the messenger, I'm not sure, so.